Hi, Steve. Thank you for accepting and giving me this opportunity to interview you.
Thank you, Nizam. It's fantastic to meet you and looking forward to it.
Okay. So, friends, here is Steve Wells. So, let me introduce you about Steve Wells. Steve Wells is an international leadership coach and peak performance consultant based in Perth, Western Australia. Steve regularly teaches and consults worldwide with elite athletes and corporate personnel to improve their performance and enhance the performance of their teams. Together with David Lake, he also conducts personal development seminars and professional training workshops in advanced EFT, SET, provocative energy techniques. What is SET and PET? Will be going very deeper, friends, in this interview. And along with advanced training in EFT with Gary Craig and several other energy therapies, Steve has trained to the highest level in provocative therapy and has been training counselors and therapists for over 25 years. Together with Dr. David Lake, he developed simple energy techniques SCT and the unique advanced energy based approach provocative energy techniques which is called PET. He has also recently developed intention based energy process also known as intention tapping. So that is Steve for us. So let us start with Steve. Tell me, how did you get into EFT?
Okay, so I first learned about this from a friend of mine who's a clinical psychologist. I am trained as a psychologist in Australia. I tell people I trained in psychology, but I assure you I have fully recovered. And I was speaking with this friend of mine, and we were just having a coffee at a coffee shop, and he said, "Oh, what do you do if you want to help people with phobias?" And I told him a couple of things that I do, and he said, "Well, you could use this new approach where you tap on these body points." And I was like, "What?" And he had been over to the USA, attended a conference, and managed to pick up Gary Craig's original videotapes. Not DVDs, not digital recordings, of videotapes. And he had brought this package of videotapes back, and he said, "Would you like to have a look?" So I borrowed those from him, and I watched them, and I was really, really interested, particularly because Gary Craig, one of those videotapes was of him working with war veterans, and I was running groups with war veterans at that time, and so I could see the results he was getting. They were really fantastic and clearly demonstrated. But people often show things that they can do. It's like, for example, in NLP, you see people do things and you think, "Well, can I do that?"
Yes.
Well, not necessarily, not
Yes.
exactly like they do it. And but I thought, okay, let's give it a go. So I got my wife and I said, "Do you want to try this new thing? And what have you got that you're worried about?" And she had a bit of a needle fear. She thought about having a needle. She kind of had this bracing reaction. And so I was just reading it from the manual at that point, and I'm getting it, to tap on this point and say, these things, and tap here and focus on the fear. And I could see her relax. And then, she started out about 5 out of 10 intensity, and then she went down to 2 out of 10. And I said, "Let's get it down to a 0. And she says, "You're not going to get me to do that silly looking thing again." And anyway, then she went and had the blood test, and she had no fear at all. She said, "I was able to watch them putting the needle in. I've never been able to do that." And she's never had a problem with needles since. And then, a few days later, I happened to have a client come in. She had a severe trauma. Her son was threatening to kill her, and she was white as a ghost, shaking like a leaf. And I just had this idea to give it a go with her. And, she was thinking about an incident where he had threatened to stab her with a knife. He wiped the blade off on her arm and threatened to kill her with it. And she tapped on this point on the finger. This is in the original long version of EFT.
Yes.
We still use these finger points in SET. And it was like the problem just left the room, you know, it was like, whew. And she said, boy, that one worked, didn't it? And I said, yeah, it looked like it did. And how do you feel about what happened the other night? She says, I don't know, it just doesn't seem to bother me as much. I said, doesn't seem to bother you as much? You were shaking like a leaf and you were white as a ghost. And she says, yeah, it just doesn't seem to bother me right now. And anyway, then she went away and she stood up to her son and she told him, you have to stop doing this to me. And she apologized to him for the things that she had done. And, you know, he got his act together and got himself a job and started behaving. And as far as I know, he's a fine, upstanding member of the community. But the result with her was so strong and so dramatic that that was when I wanted to look into it more. I started using it with more clients. I started using it with the war veterans. I contacted my friend, Dr. David Lake, and he felt it. I was explaining it to him over the phone. He could feel it instantly. And not long after that, we traveled to the US. We studied with Gary Craig in February 1998 at his advanced workshop back then. And my friend David Lake got up on stage and got his lifelong public speaking phobia, you know, cured by Gary. It took about 38 minutes. And then that was, you know, that was the beginning of us starting to then teach it to people, because Gary was essentially giving it away to people and saying, hey, you can go and teach this to other people and spread the word. And so we did. We started teaching it. You know, I invited my friend to come to workshops I was running where we incorporated this. He was able to come and present and not have any fear. Wow. And we spent about 18 years traveling around the world together, teaching initially EFT, and then we progressively developed our own techniques.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so please tell me what motivated you to develop SET? What does SET stand for, and what is the history of it? How is it different from EFT?
Okay, so originally we were using EFT, and then we started to, one is we started to question some of the things in EFT, whether they were necessary. That we started to develop some of our own ways of applying it. Initially, you know, we were writing these things to Gary, and Gary was, some of them are incorporated. You'll find a lot of our articles on Gary Craig's website. You know, we were, David Lake came up with the idea of continual tapping, where instead of doing rounds of tapping, you just have the person tapping the whole time. You know, because he found that in EFT, you work with someone with a trauma, and then, you know, you find that you find an issue, you work on that, you know, you check in with the client, and then you find another part of the problem, and you know, and each time you do a round of EFT. But as he got more efficient, he was getting more rounds of EFT in with each client, and the clients that were getting more tapping were getting better results. So then he thought, well, why stop tapping? So we incorporated continual tapping, and, you know, Gary was championing what we were doing. Then we started questioning, you know, like, why do you have to use the setup statement? Why do you have to say it 3 times, you know? And we asked Gary this, and he said, we said, why do you have to say it 3 times? He said, well, because Roger Callahan says you do, you know, like Roger Callahan, who created TFT, which Gary evolved into EFT, they had the setup statement originally, and you did it 3 times. So Gary did it 3 times. But we're like, well, you don't do it 3 times anymore, you know, you're not doing that. And a lot of the time you're not even using it. And then we like, well, why do you have to tap on this point to do the setup anyway? Can you tap on this point, or can you? Anyway, in the end, we just kept on going, and we questioned whether you needed the setup statement at all. And we found that you didn't. And in fact, the setup statement itself has other issues, because in EFT, you have to say, you know, you have to tap on this point, or you rub this sore spot in the original version.
Yes.
And you have people say, you know, even though I have this problem, I deeply and completely accept myself. But they don't accept themselves. So then you have a problem with them with their non-self-acceptance, and you have some resistance from people. And even people who are relatively well put together actually have a reaction to that statement. And we were running lots of self-acceptance workshops because we kept finding people with self-acceptance issues, and we didn't realize that we were causing it because we were triggering it with the self-acceptance statement, you know? And anyway, so we started testing whether you could get results without it. And we saw that Gary wasn't using it a lot of the time anyway. And in the end, I used it with 70 people in a row without any one of them needing it. And I figured that was enough, you know? And, you know, according to the theory, people are supposed to be blocked, but we had learned from Dr. Larry Nims that you could just treat the block as the next problem, and you can just tap on that. So we just evolved an approach that involves just tapping, focusing on whatever you're aware of, without having to make up words for the problem, because making up the words is what people get hung up on with EFT. They're always like, oh, give me the script for this, or give me the words for this. Some things don't have words.
Yes,
you have a feeling in your body.
I don't know why these scripts did not resonate for me as well right from the beginning, Steve.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, sometimes they're helpful starting points for some people, but in the end, you really want to work on whatever your problem is.
Yes.
And whatever your problem is, it's going to be in your thoughts and your feelings. And so if you have a feeling in your body, in your stomach, you don't have to make up words in order to focus on that feeling. You can just put your attention on that feeling and you can just tap. And we found that was much more efficient. And we didn't have to try and get people to come up with words or be clever. And if they had an image in their mind that was upsetting them, they didn't have to make up words to describe the image to be able to focus on the image and just tap. So we did away with the need for, you know, reminder statements. Not that we don't use words, you know, we do where that's helpful, but we allow people to focus on whatever they're aware of, whatever the problem is, and just follow that. And all I have to do is tap. And we also discovered that the tapping itself has something beneficial, even if you don't even do it in a focused way. So in EFT, they're very fond of, you know, you have to find the core issues and all this stuff. And we found people who were getting results just from doing a lot of tapping without ever finding the core issue. And we discovered what we call energy toning, which is, you know, if your stress is up here and your good life energy is down here, and you tap, you know, you'll do a session of tapping and that will come down. But you know what? Some people, there's so much stress in their system, it just comes back. But we found that if you do tapping every day, you can bring this down and bring your good life energy up. And you can change your set point for stress and anxiety so that it's just not, you know. Anyway, so all these things that we were doing, and we were, you know, originally we were writing to Gary and we were saying, you know, we're doing this, and he was incorporating, and it was all good. And then ultimately it got to a point where it was too different. And you know, we were still calling it EFT, but, you know, I had a long conversation with Gary, and we agreed to call it something else, basically. And you know, we went away with his blessing, and we started calling it Simple Energy Techniques. But there are thousands of people that we've taught all over the world to do tapping this way, and a number of Gary's original EFT masters, they do this as well. They don't use setup statements anymore, and they just call it EFT. And EFT is like Kleenex, you know, like if you don't call it whatever brand it is, you call it Kleenex when you have a tissue in a lot of countries. And, you know, it's like, so EFT is the brand name for tapping for most people, even though there's lots of different ways of doing it.
Yes.
So we call it SET, Simple Energy Techniques, because our approach isn't EFT. We don't use setup statements. We don't use reminder phrases. We use continual tapping. We do energy toning. We also incorporate the finger points. Whereas mostly EFT, they don't use the finger points anymore. We find the finger points really beneficial. And we also teach people to tap using the thumb of their same hand on the finger points, which is really, really good, because then you can take the tapping with you into public situations.
Yes, they cannot, it feels weird, yeah.
Yeah, but I've taught executives, sports people, you know, managers, regular people, just to take this with them, and they can just tap on those points using the thumb of the same hand, or they can just rub or put a bit of pressure on the points, And that's very discreet. See, I can be tapping here. I'm tapping on my finger points right now, and we're having a conversation. And if I were feeling anxious, that tapping would be bringing the anxiety down and, you know, regulating the energy supply and restoring the balance and all that good stuff.
Wow.
So, yeah, there's a few other things, but those are kind of some of the main differences.
Okay. So you have created altogether a separate course itself. Yes.
Well, yeah, and you know, we're still using the same points that were originally EFT. But even then, when we were at that workshop with Gary in 1998, a guy I can't remember his name, an acupuncturist came along, and he was the one who introduced this point on the top of the head that they use in EFT, and the point of the wrist that they use in EFT, and that just became incorporated into EFT because these are just good, helpful, comprehensive, accessible points, you know.
Okay.
But there are points all over the body you could tap on, you know. So it just happens that the points that these points are accessible, they cover a lot of bases, and you know, they've been shown to work.
Right. Thank you. It gave a basic idea about what SCT is. Now let's get into PET. So please tell me about it. How did it happen? I'm very curious to know. You look very calm, and you know, it's a PET is like the way it is assumed. There's a lot of confusions around provocative techniques. So please explain your journey about PET.
Okay, so my good friend David Lake and I, we met learning about provocative therapy. Provocative therapy was an approach created by a clinical social worker from the USA named Frank Farrelly. And he discovered this in working with clients that, you know, he was working with chronic schizophrenics and trying to say, you know, you can change, your life can be better. And they kept coming back, I'm never going to change and I'm always going to be hopeless. And the more he did that, the more they dug themselves into a hole. And then one day with one of his clients, after 91 interviews with this chronic schizophrenic, you know, 91 interviews, that's a lot of interviews. And eventually he said, I just gave up, you know, and he just said, okay, basically, all right, I give up. You know, I agree with you. You can't be changed. Immediately, the guy says, what do you mean I can't be changed? You know? And he's like, well, you know, we've been here doing this and it hasn't been working. He's like, well, I'm getting better, you know? Instantly, he goes to the other side. And so this is what happens in this approach. And the reason why it fits with EFT really well and tapping really well is because tapping works on the negative, okay? And so, you know, a lot of people who've been to positive thinking school, and I was, you know, I did a lot of that in the past myself.
Yes.
You know, it was like, what? We got to focus on the problem. Doesn't that make things worse? Actually, it doesn't necessarily.
Yes.
Okay? In fact, it's the unwillingness to face the dark side that's the problem for most people. And so we had learned to use the negative and exaggerate the negative and amplify the negative and make it funny and bring humor in, you know. And so we've been using that before we learned tapping. And then when we learned tapping, we were doing it kind of like what we call vanilla EFT, you know, using it the way it was prescribed and using it in a very straight linear way. But then we're just, both of us in it, you know, David lives on the other side of Australia. We both, because we've been infected by the provocative virus, which is very different to the virus that's out there in the world at the moment. This is an enhancing virus. It brings light and life and lightness into your life and humor and lets you see the funny side of life. And so we've been doing that. And instead of pushing against resistance, trying to get people to do things, we took over the resistance and gave it a name and gave it a voice and reflected it back and so on. And the more we did that, the less they felt the need to resist and the more they're able to see the positive side and so on. It's kind of funny sometimes when you're stuck in your problem, you can't see it. But when I kind of exaggerate it, it's easy to see how ridiculous it is.
Okay.
So this is what, this is what the provocative approach does. And it's not something I can explain in 1 minute, but in
Yes.
essence, it's about playing devil's advocate while being on the side of the angels, is the way Frank Farrelly described it. And it has, has that element of play. It has that element of humor. It has a lot of exaggeration in it, and it helps people to kind of externalize the problem and see it out there rather than be stuck in it. And yeah, it uses the resistance to change, because everybody has resistance to change. And generally, you try and push against resistance. We go with the resistance. We exaggerate the resistance, and people don't feel such a need to resist anymore, essentially.
So Steve, there are different types of therapies, like very empathetic, and there are going with the client's flow and all that stuff. So do you think provocating a client, do everyone resonate with provocative therapy?
Yes, because you're making a fundamental error that most people do, is that they only see one side to provocation. They think that provocation is confrontation.
Yeah,
that
or trigger a person with something.
Yeah, not at all. And in fact, it's one of the most empathic and warm and wonderful things that you can experience. It's a paradox, because the words of the therapist and the practitioner and the images are negative, but the warmth and the acceptance that comes from the practitioner is something to behold. In fact, that's what I got hooked by when I learned provocative therapy. I went up to work with Frank Farrelly, and I'm like, oh, I've got all these things that are, I've got all these things to do. And he's like, oh, super Steve, and then and it was like, exactly, I'm trying to be Superman. And he's like, well, come on, you got to keep being Superman, and the more he's encouraging me to keep doing my problem, the more I'm seeing how ridiculous it is, and I'm like, oh, well, I just want to help people. And he's like, yes, because people are so pathetic, they're so hopeless and helpless. And I'm like, well, no, I don't see people as pathetic and hopeless, but actually the way I was acting was as if they were pathetic and hopeless, and that I was the only one who was going to save them. And it just freed me from all those, having to carry the cross for my clients and stuff like that. So it's a very freeing approach. And the definition of provoke, the root meaning of provoke is to draw out, to call out. And so the provocative approach draws out people's strengths. And it does that in one of the most empathic and caring ways possible, and brings in humor. Whereas a lot of the so-called caring and empathic approaches just make people suffer more,
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for clarifying that as well.
No worries.
Because, the word provocative itself could be, what is this all about? So thanks for clarification.
It's probably not politically correct in these times to use the word provocative, because provocative, seems to only have one meaning, but no, not so.
Okay, thank you. And your latest development, intention tapping, could you please?
Okay, so intention tapping sits between SET, which is very simple, just approach of just tapping and following what's going on, and which is a very simple approach, and then PET, which is a much more advanced approach. It involves a lot of communication strategies. It involves having to be learning to be present and have your heart open and all this stuff. All of this stuff is a crucial part of everything I do. But PET is one of the highest levels of learning of that. With tapping, it's easy. You can just learn tapping, and the technique itself can produce results. But then if you want to use that to help people, what do you do with it, and how do you use it? And EFT has got a whole bunch of ways that they've evolved of how to apply it and how to use it, to work through different aspects of problems, how to work through events. You know, they're very fond of working through past events and all that stuff. What I just, you know, intention tapping and you know, what I call intention-based energy process, this is something I discovered. And, you know, I haven't discovered many things in my life, but this is a real discovery. And it's been very helpful for me, for my wife, for my family, for my clients, you know. And it's continually surprising, you know, what it can do. So I made this discovery when I had a painful heel spur, and I'd been starting to get back into trying to get some distance running and stuff like this. And, you know, I got up to about 28 kilometers in one run, and it wasn't really a run. You could call it a cross between a walk and a jog, you know, but I injured myself and I ended up having this heel spur, and I couldn't move, and I was in agony every time I tried to walk. It's funny, you know, when you have a physical thing, you also start, you know, everything all happens at once.
Yeah.
So I was a bit frustrated with my business at the time. You know, I wasn't getting enough work. I wasn't marketing very well, and I wasn't happy with how I was being in my life, and I was doing a lot of procrastinating and what you could call self-sabotage. So all of this stuff was really getting me. So I'm doing everything I know to try and get out of this funk. I'm doing tapping, you know, I'm using, have you heard of TRE? It's a shaking approach, trauma release exercises.
No.
It's an approach created by Dr. David Berceli. It's a fantastic approach to it. It initiates a shaking process in the body that shakes the trauma out of the cells.
Yeah. That process I heard somewhere, yes.
Yeah, and neurogenic tremors. And so I was using this. I was using an approach called logosynthesis, developed by a guy named Willem Lammers from Switzerland. We met him at Gary Craig's workshop back in 1998, and he's developed, you know, his own approach. And I was working through some non-duality lessons, and my marketing coach had studied with people like Byron Katie, and he put together an unstuck process. So I was using his unstuck process to get unstuck on my marketing. Okay. And then I got drawn back into Byron Katie's book, Loving What Is. And Byron Katie has a fantastic process she calls the work, and it's very much based on an inquiry process of truth. Yes. And you can get a lot of relief from suffering just by asking, is it true, you know? And most of the stuff we're believing is not true at all. It just, and she says you suffer when you believe a thought that differs to reality. So I got drawn back into reading her book again, and in her book, Loving What Is, there's a statement that says, it's not the thought, it's the attachment to the thought that causes suffering. And I knew this already, but there was something about that moment that was just like, yeah, like when you do tapping, you can have a thought that upsets you. And when you do the tapping, you focus on that thought, you do the tapping, now you can think that thought, it doesn't upset you. So the emotion has become separated from the thought. And so in my mind, I'm like, yeah, okay, it's the emotional attachments that cause the problem. And the tapping releases the emotional attachments. And just in a moment of insight, it occurred to me, could we just use intention? So I just formed a simple intention in that moment. I release all my emotional attachments to this problem.
Wow.
And instantly, it was, you know, when you do tapping, if you've done tapping, you know that you get these shifts. When you move through an aspect and you get a big problem and you have a big shift and it's a big sigh or a big yawn or a big, you know, aha.
Yeah.
And that happened straight away. And I thought, wow, that was interesting. Let's try it again. And I found another part of the problem. I said, I release all my emotional attachments to that. Same thing, big shift. And then I did it again. Same thing, big shift. Every single aspect I focused on, it just shifted. And it shifted straight away. I didn't need to do 20 minutes tapping on each aspect. It just shifted. And And then after I'd done it for a little while, I realized I had this tightness in my chest. And it occurred to me, of course, you know, like there's every problem, there's a disturbance in energy flow in the body. And tapping helps to restore the flow. And my insight again was, what if we could just use intention? So I focused on my chest and the feeling of tightness, and I simply formed the intention, I restore the right energy flow to my chest. Beautiful, big, you know, expansion in the chest, nice, easy, deep breath, and a shifting of the tension, gone. And I thought, well, this is very interesting. But then, of course, you know, my judging mind came in and said, this is ridiculous. You must be making this up, you know, you must be just thinking this. But I just kept doing it. And then I went to my wife, she's used to this now after all these years. And I said, I've got this new thing I've been trying. Would you like to give it a go? Have you got any problems you want to focus on? And she's like, yeah, okay. And she did it on a problem. She felt better instantly.
Oh, wow.
The next morning, I'm on Skype talking to a friend of mine. He has an issue with a family member that's really upsetting him, and he has to go and see them. And I said, just try this statement. I release all my emotional attachments to this. And he said, wow, that was really palpable. So that was the beginning of what I now call intention-based energy process, intention tapping. And I started, you know, sharing it with more people, you know, trying it out with clients, and it just kept working and working and working and working and working. And, you know, it's now evolved into intention tapping. You can use the intention statements without tapping, and they work very, very well. You combine them with tapping and you just get the best of both worlds. You get like a beautiful harmonizing that occurs in the body, and you can alternate between the intention statements and the tapping. And I use it, you know, together with a mindful approach, just following the movements of energy and emotion and thought. And what I've learned is that you just trust that there's an unconscious part of you that will give you the next aspect. And what this has become is so many things that I used to think you had to do in EFT, you don't have to do it all. And in this approach, it's, you know, to some extent, it's the opposite. Like in EFT, you have to be specific, right? Well, in using this, you could say, okay, I release all my emotional attachments to my mother. Really big global issue. But when you do that, what happens is your unconscious reveals to you the aspect about your mother that's upsetting you the most at the moment. And so it starts to move, and what moves and what comes next is the next aspect. And if you just trust, your unconscious will deliver the next bit. So then you can say, I release all my emotional attachments to this, you know, the way my mother looks at me or whatever she says or whatever it is. And then you'll just be led to the next aspect, whether it's a feeling in the body or a thought or a memory or whatever. And you don't have to kind of make a list of all your traumas and all that stuff. You just follow the energy and emotion, and it works really well.
Wow. That's interesting, Steve. Thank you. So you have explained about SCT, about PET, then about intention tapping. I see something behind you, 100% Yes book.
Well, thank you for noticing my strategic.
Can I have a closer look of that book, please?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Oh. All right. So it's funny because
something like, what is this 100% yes, the energy of success, release your resistance. So please tell me about that book.
Sure. So my concept of 100% yes is that when you want to go for something, you know, you decide you want to change your life, usually you have resistance. Like if you have a little kid and you say, you want to go to the moon? They're like, yes, you know. You say that to an adult and they're like, well, you can't go to the moon. You can, you know, they come up with all the barriers.
Yes.
See? And the concept of 100% yes is like a little kid who loves ice cream, and you say, do you want to have some ice cream? And they say, yes, you know. But you have an adult who loves ice cream, and you say, do you want to have some ice cream? They're like, well, yeah, but I'm on a
But
it's gonna put on sugar and it's gonna kill me. Oh, no, no, no. And it's a yes, no, right? And so they're like torn, and they can't really go for it 100%. Now, fine, you could argue that ice cream, is or isn't good for people, but when it's something even that you know is 100% good for you, you can still feel held back from it because you've learnt so much what I call BS, which is belief systems, which is just, all the reasons why you can't have it or why you can't do it or you're not good enough for it or you don't deserve it and all that stuff that, the universal one, I'm not good enough. The one that all over the planet.
The most found belief to be walked down. I'm not good enough. Yeah.
Oh, that's if there's a universal belief, that's it. And so what this is about is, I was teaching peak performance workshops, and doing peak performance work with people. And, they came up with the concept of, the yes and the no, because you can say to someone, you're like, okay, if you're successful, what will happen? Well, some people, they think about success and they're 100% yes, they just go for it. Other people, they think about it and they're like, well, yeah, but then this will happen. Like one guy said, if I'm successful, I'll lose my marriage.
Oh, okay.
Well, if you're successful and you lose your marriage and you love your wife, you're not successful. So your version of success has got a problem. And, so his is a yes and a no at the same time. So of course he's not going to go for it if he's going to lose his marriage, if he loves his wife. So first of all, it's actually having a vision that encompasses what success really is and asking for what you really want. But there's so much stuff that we've learned about what we can't have and what we can't do and why we can't do it, that we have to clear out that BS in order to be able to see clearly.
Wow.
The other thing is that I've done a lot of work with values, and this is a core part of what I call 100% yes, because values are what's really important to you. And yet they're kind of pulling you and pushing you, and sometimes you might be going for things that are not really your values at all. And in general, what's most important should be number one, and you should go for that first, and you should put most of your energy into that. But what if you don't know what's really important? What if you've been told that this is important, but it really isn't? What if your values are really just your parents' values rather than your own values, or what you learned you should value, but you really don't? And so, the whole world is telling you you should like it, but you just don't, because it's not for you, because it's not really your bag. And so you have all this internal civil war going on, and so I like to kind of release all that stuff, help people to get clear on what they really want, what's really important to them, and then help them to be able to go for it 100% without being blocked and without having to be held back by false beliefs and false values.
That's amazing, Steve, because this is where when clients come to me like this, I want to exercise, but I don't want to. I want to stop binge eating, but I want to all this like binge watching, but I know I'm wasting my time. But so maybe this book is the solution.
Well, that book was my beginnings of the solution. But I'll tell you something about it. I was running 100% yes workshops, and then I had the idea to do this book, and yet the book, I never got it finished. And I even said to one of my friends way back then, I'm only about 80% yes on finishing the 100% yes book, because I love presenting, I love helping people, but writing wasn't my number one. I like to do it, but getting a book written is a lot bigger. And in the end, it was only when I discovered the intention process that I was able to release my attachments to this book having to be, I was so attached to it having to be so profound, and it was so profound it was never going to get done. So then when I released those attachments, I was able to put it out there into the world. Okay. And now I need to do the same thing for the intention tapping book, we've just put together a certification program for the intention tapping. We're just about to launch that process right now. We'll start certifying people in this approach. You know, probably the first group will be going through in a couple of months' time.
Wow.
Have a really big waiting list because people have been starting to show interest in this, and it seems very timely. I don't know about you, but since the coronavirus, I've never been busier. And I mean busier in a good way. I mean, I have been busier. I've been busier in a bad way in the past, but I've never been busier in a good way. And it seems that a lot of things have
falling into the place.
lined up. Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Steve. Like, so many things. It's like talking to you now, EFT practitioners or whoever is planning to get into EFT. I'm sure now they have other tools also to add to their toolbox, like SCT, PET, intention tapping, and a wonderful book. And you also said that you are coming up with certification program on intention tapping. So that's awesome.
Yeah. So ultimately there will be a website for that, and don't go there just yet because it's not just finished, but depends when you get this out there.
Yes.
My son is actually building that for us. He's only just started on that, but it should be ready within a few weeks' time, and then we'll be able to have that launched. There is a lot of stuff on our current website. We started out with EFT Down Under, and then we had a lot of material. We have a lot of content on that site on EFT, as well as a lot of content on SET and a lot of content on PET. And there's on the blog more recently a lot of the intention tapping stuff. But we're going to create a separate intention tapping site, and that will be there in future when people go. Yeah, we'll start putting all the, of course, they can search on YouTube on intention tapping or my name and tapping, and they'll find a whole bunch of examples and demonstrations of me using this with clients and group coachings that we've filmed and webinars and so on. So there's a lot of free information on there.
Yeah. Thank you for that information, Steve. And one more question. I have seen this PET manual on your website. Is it like anyone can start reading it and applying PET, or is it only for the people who got certified as PET practitioners?
Well, anyone can read it. Like for example, anyone can read Frank Farrelly's book, Provocative Therapy. But if they're going to use provocative therapy, they want to train in that. There are aspects of the provocative approach which will enhance communication generally. The biggest, most important thing about all of it is that you never do it unless you have your heart open. Okay. You never do it unless you have a good connection. You never use any, in fact, you really shouldn't use any approach unless that's true. Yes. But it's far more important that if you're going to be provoking and having fun with people, that they get the joke, that it's funny for them, that it's using their material rather than just stuff that you're trying to push in, and that you have a heart connection. And if you have a heart connection, you can say anything to people, and that's absolutely essential, and it's something that everybody could learn from, and it's a huge part of PET.
Okay. And Steve, due to this pandemic and various other things, it's good that one aspect is like trainings have become more global without having someone from India, like need not travel to Australia to get trained. Like this, any plans to convert this SET, PET, intention tapping, all these courses into online mode?
Well, we already have. I've been running online courses for many years. I have online group coaching programs, which are personal development programs. I have online programs for practitioners. We run online workshops. So we have, this weekend I'm running the third day of an online training with people from Germany, and then next month we have. Well, I have the 100% Yes group coaching that just filled up.
Okay.
it filled up so quickly. I have to see if I can fit in, if I can fit any more group times in, but I don't think I'll be able to this time round. But they come up regularly, and people can, if they get onto our currently, as I say, EFTdownunder.com, they can get onto our newsletter and find out. They can have a look on the events and trainings side of that and see what we're doing. I have an intention tapping introductory workshop coming up in the early September. That will be on there soon. We have one for French people coming up after that, and then for Italian people coming up after that. So, but I think most of the people in India would be speaking English.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank
Don't
you.
have any other languages just yet.
Yeah. So thanks a lot, Steve. I got to know how you got into EFT. That was a therapist totally shifting into tapping and then exploring. Maybe that was destined, SCT, then PET, then intention tapping. I don't know what else you will be discovering in this journey. But for EFT practitioners across, blending these techniques would definitely going to be very useful to get better results to their clients and self as well. So
well, I think it's always important to have, number one, we owe it to our clients to be always looking for how we can do things more effectively, more efficiently, and more effectively. And if we're still doing the tapping in 20 years the way we are now, then I think we will have failed a whole bunch of clients, because we need to be exploring new ways to make this work better.
So that's how these new modalities have been emerged. That's awesome. Thank you very much, Steve, once again for your time and explaining about all these things. And I'm curious to read this book. 100% yes.
Excellent.
And,
well,
thank you very much.
I look forward to your feedback. And
sure.
Yeah.
Thank you very much once again, Steve.
Very good speaking with you.
Yeah.